So today's film was shot in the Peruvian Amazon and then acquired by Amazon Prime Video. That's what I call symmetry. Howdy, I'm Jeff Goldsmith, and this is the Q&A. My agenda is simple. Each week, I plan to bring you in-depth insights into the creative process of storytelling. And folks, I love today's movie, Wildcat. It's a documentary, and it's fantastic. I suggest you go in cold because there's a lot to discuss here. It's not the typical documentary that you expect it to be. It goes above and beyond what's in the trailer, and it is totally worth your time. So don't worry, before we get into spoilers, there is a very clear spoiler alert. But I guess the way to say it would be that it has a very strong human story that I know that you will enjoy. So go in cold. You will be glad you did. The good news is today I have co-directors Trevor Frost and Melissa Lesh with me to discuss what it took to make Wildcat. And they were very forthcoming about their creative process and how difficult a documentary like this can be, from everything from their huge edit to just what it takes to shoot in the Amazon and battling the elements with your camera gear. So there is a lot in here to digest, and Trevor and Melissa were very forthcoming about their process, so I know you'll dig this episode. And speaking of things to dig, Backstory Magazine just turned 10. That's right, we have lasted a decade and we couldn't have done it without you. Of course, now is the perfect time to become a subscriber, and it's the holiday season. You could even give a gift subscription to Backstory Magazine. Just in our shopping cart over at backstory.net, you click the little gift box in the checkout cart, and that's how you do it. And look, we just published our Wakanda Forever issue, which has a lot of awards season coverage in it, so it is a perfect time to get in and read it. If you want to see what's in the issue, you can see our table of contents over at backstory.net and surf around there. And if you've never read us before, you could, of course, read our free issue at backstory.net or on our iPad app entitled Backstory. And look, just to make the idea of becoming a subscriber or giving a gift subscription even more appealing, I am offering you discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will save you $5 off a 1-year subscription. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now, without any further ado, let's jump right into our interview with co-directors Trevor Frost and Melissa Lesh about their latest documentary, Wildcat, which is in theaters right now and coming on to Amazon Prime on December 30th, 2022. I loved your film, and I kind of want to give people a baseline for you each and let them know who you are and from whence dost thou hail. Melissa, where are you from? Where'd you go to school? How'd you get into filmmaking?
I didn't go to school for film. I grew up in Wisconsin. I was born in Mumbai. And I spent quite a lot of time as a kid in India. And so some of kind of my earliest, fondest memories were living in this campus in Mumbai. And every night there'd be leopards that would come into the campus and roam around. They'd actually come to eat the dogs, street dogs. And we'd have monkeys coming to our window. And at the time I was painting a lot. So my dad, he's a fine artist, and my mom's a cellist. She's a musician. So I was always surrounded by art as a kid, and I always gravitated to wildlife and nature. And I think India played a role in that, and also wandering swamps, and cattails in Wisconsin as a kid. So fast forward then to my time at school, I moved to Virginia and actually went to school at VCU, which is a big art school. And I went to school for painting and printmaking. And I was still kind of working in the sciences. Every summer I would take off and work for the Fish and Wildlife Service as a biological technician. And it was kind of this split life between art and science. And I kept thinking and trying to find a way, I really want to combine these two things. So I started teaching myself film. I picked up a camera. It wasn't film at the time. It was digital. My first camera was a T2i.
Nice.
But I taught myself how to edit. I remember I was living in this little, basically lodge up in Maine, Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge. And I would just go on YouTube and try and figure out, how do you cut something together? I didn't know what directing was. I didn't know what producing was, but I knew what shooting and editing was. So that's kind of where I started. And, and here we are.
All right. We're going to fill in a couple other blanks, but I want to get to Trevor for a second. Trevor, how did you end up down this path? I know a little more about you. I was able to find out that you had done still photography for National Geographic and Wired and Washington Post. and you had been doing nature photography. Tell us more about your track as well.
I got a Young Explorers grant from National Geographic in 2008. So I think I was like 22 or 23 at the time. I can't remember exactly what my age was then, but it was around that. And that grant was designed for people between the ages of 18 and 25. And the idea was it could go to writers, photographers, filmmakers, scientists, explorers. And I pitched National Geographic a project exploring caves in Central Africa and Gabon. And so I was lucky enough to be awarded one of these grants. That's sort of one of the early grantees in the program. It's still around, but they've changed the name. And that grant was really what got me started. Before that, I was a student at Virginia Commonwealth University. Melissa also went there here in Richmond, Virginia. Where I grew up. I lived in Richmond, Virginia most of my life. And so I don't have a super exciting childhood. It was pretty normal by all means. But my parents, they met in the Galapagos and they had traveled quite extensively around the world working on science projects. So I grew up hearing stories about that. But, from the moment that I was born until the day I turned 18, I actually really never left the country, I think, except for on a cruise. So this was maybe not what I think outsiders would have expected. They wouldn't have expected me to take this path. But that Young Explorers grant from National Geographic is what really changed things for me, and that set me off on a sort of a 12-year odyssey of working primarily with them. Most of my work was with them over the last 12 years until I started working on this film. And so that's kind of a little bit of a backstory from me.
I just want to see if I got this right. I think the first time you both came together was in 2017 for the short film Person of the Forest. Is that correct, or is that completely wrong? I see you nodding your head.
No, I'm impressed that you know about that film and recognize it. That was our last film that we worked on together. That was 2017. That was a 17-minute short film, so quite than our current movie. But we had actually been working together. Trevor and I have been together for 8 years. We met in Richmond, like you mentioned. We both went to VCU, but that's actually not where we met. We met kayaking on the James River, whitewater kayaking.
Okay.
And so we've been working together really since we met. Different projects. He was shooting, for the magazine for National Geographic, and I would often come and, shoot video for the digital side of things. We worked on a project together. We got a grant from Nat Geo and went to Australia and lived there for about 8 months and filmed crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles up in the Northern Territory. So yeah, we've been in wild places together for a while working on animal and conservation stories.
Well, that's good to know that you guys have that history. I mean, it obviously shows how this movie was, a culmination of your talents so well. Let's get right into the movie. We're still in the non-spoiler section. I'm just going from stuff that's kind of in the trailer here. So it's, not really speaking out of school. How did you come into contact with former British Army veteran Harry Turner, who had been discharged for PTSD and then decided he didn't want to be around people for a while? So he went to the Peruvian Amazon.
As we were just talking about, I was a still photographer for a bunch of different publications, freelance, and worked for a bunch of different publications. And National Geographic was the main place that I was, turning to because they're telling the kinds of stories that really interested me. And they're really one of the last sort of magazines that would spend the money that is required to actually, get a lot of time in the field, which is just important on wildlife stories because, you never know when the animal's going to show up. And so I was sort of trying to piece together my next story for them on anacondas. And it never ended up coming to fruition because this film obviously took over our lives. But I was down in the Peruvian Amazon looking for anacondas and spent 60 days looking for them and only found 2 at the very end of that 60-day period. So it was pretty, miserable as far as success goes in terms of actually getting a photo story out of it. You can't make a photo story out of 3 photos. As luck would have it, because we weren't finding any, I was spending a lot more time, back in this small sort of frontier town on the edge of the Amazon. And I was trying to come up with, how are we going to change our plans tomorrow to increase the chances that we find an anaconda? And sitting in the lobby of the same hotel one day, and Harry Turner walked by. And as he walked by, a friend of mine sitting next to me who was working on this anaconda project leaned over and said, "Hey, did you see that guy? You're never going to believe his story." And I was pretty, blown away by what I had heard. And then I was more blown away by a few days later when I met Harry and Samantha at that same hotel in my hotel room, because obviously both of them, were just incredible to be around, very inspiring, very, they both talked with incredible passion about the work that they were doing. But I think what moved me more was when they plugged in a hard drive that they brought with them and started to show me video from their years of living together in the rainforest and rescuing animals and building Samantha's extraordinary organization, Hoja Nueva. And I couldn't believe that the quality of the cinematography was as high as it was. And I also was blown away by when they chose to film and keep recording, because when things get difficult, people tend to stop recording. And so the fact that they filmed through some really difficult and sensitive moments, it really engaged me. And I thought to myself, there's something here to make a short film. And then I was back home in Virginia about a month later, and Samantha called me and told me that they had just rescued a second ocelot. And so that's sort of the rest is history after that, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, just to go back for a second, Samantha Zwicker is the other protagonist of the film. Hoja Nueva is her organization. It's an animal rescue organization. It also helps to, prevent illegal logging and to have conservancies down there in the rainforest. And she really is a charismatic and smart driven person who has experience in the field. And it's an interesting combo with Harry, who was kind of new. And, because Samantha studied this in school. She was getting her graduate degree, but Harry was just kind of going through the school of life and learning how to do it and adapting to his environment, which is interesting. I guess the first question off the bat, as you said, you were wowed by their footage. In their minds, why do you think they were filming so much before they even met you? Do you think they wanted to make a documentary on their own?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think it was twofold. A lot of the time that they spent filming was with the ocelot, and particularly Harry, but also Samantha. And as they were raising him, Sam was actually the one that brought down the camera for Harry and had, made sure that there was the gear and that they had batteries and ability to charge it. So I think it was in part scientific documentation. And they really wanted to understand, again, this is a very new science. Wildlife reintroduction is really just starting to kind of take hold, and, we're learning so much in the process. So this had never been done, and not in this way where they're spending long periods of time, with the cats in this really kind of one-on-one way. So they really wanted to document what that process was like, how big are they getting? What are they eating? Because it also varies, their diet varies locally as well and regionally. Right. So, what are they able to hunt? There was a lot that they were just learning and wanted to document in the process of doing that. And then I know for Harry, and I think, probably for Sam too, this is such a remarkable thing to have this, relationship or proximity to a wild cat like that. And so I think they were so in awe. It was such an incredible experience that they just wanted to document every moment of it. Harry talks about, I couldn't believe I was walking down the trail of this, of the rainforest with this wild cat. And I just felt like I had to document it. It was so remarkable and so beautiful. And something that I know they both wanted to remember.
We're going to talk in detail about the plot, of course, and their experience with the animals. But, as documentarians, here we are talking about your film, and you met somebody in a lobby. Some people would chalk that up to, oh, that's interesting, I'm going to tell my friends back home about it. You two decided that there's a movie in it. Did you write up a treatment and look for grant money? What were your initial footsteps towards realizing it was a film? I know that you had said that it might be a short film. So maybe early on you didn't realize that it was going to become a feature doc. But tell us about those early steps of realizing that you wanted to get involved and see what happens.
I think, like so many others, have fallen victim over the years to thinking too much about what something's going to do for me, in terms of like, how is this going to change my life, or how is this going to change my career? And I think it's very easy to get swept up in that kind of thinking. It happens to the best of us. And I think it probably happens to some degree on every project that you work on. The question is, how much are you able to kind of push it away and do something just because you want to do it and you think that it's important, or that you care about this particular story. And in this case, neither Melissa or I had ever worked on anything like this. And so, really, when we were thinking about putting together a short, the idea was to go down there on one trip and do a bunch of interviews and then stitch it together with this footage of Khan. And that was kind of it. And, that was something that we had experience with, right? Like we had, done this other film, and we had the orangutan film, Person of the Forest. We did that on, I think it was like a, $12,000 or $16,000 budget. I can't remember which, but, it's a very small budget. And, we had access to all the footage because I had been working with Tim Lehman, who filmed a lot of it. He had a huge orangutan project. So the footage was all there, which was nice. But I saw the promise for sure in this being a short film. But I think what then happened is, we obviously went down there because this new cat came into the picture. And once we were down there, we really didn't think a whole lot about sort of the process or treatments or the story. To be perfectly honest with you, Melissa and I think at that point didn't even know what a treatment was. Like, we didn't know about getting contracts with all of your subjects or characters. There were all these things that we really had no idea about. And so really what propelled us to go down there, especially in the first sort of year and a half, which was most of production, was just that we were in love with the story, and obviously we could tell that there was something there. And so the propellant behind it was nothing other than just kind of, let's just keep going down and filming and see what happens.
That's not easy for a lot of filmmakers. Were you doing it on your own dime at a certain point and just expecting later that you would recoup if you didn't pre-sell?
It was a little bit naive, to be honest. I think back and I'm like, if it hadn't worked out, we would have been screwed. We put everything on credit cards. Trevor had a lot of frequent flyer miles from traveling on photo assignments over the years. So we flew down on frequent flyer miles and just, barely made it work. I mean, also, it wasn't very, demanding. We were living in the rainforest, so there's not a lot of costs.
Right.
You're out in the middle of nowhere, you're eating potatoes and yucca. And so it was really just the cost of getting there. And we took the cheap, it took us 2 days to get down there because we took the absolute cheapest, worst flights. And the gear we had, Trevor and I had been doing our own work at that point. So, I had a SC300 Mark II and audio, we had the basics to kind of start the movie.
Well, actually, I was going to ask about that because so you had one camera, you had your flashcards for your storage, and what kind of audio did you have? How are you getting audio in these scenes?
Yeah, a lot of it was on camera.
So you weren't miking them?
We were miking them, but all the footage that you see, and we can get into this in greater depth, but all the footage you see of the cats, so that was not filmed by us.
Right.
That was really important as part of their protocol that we didn't have access to. I'll say Keanu, because when we came along, it was Keanu. So we didn't have access to them. So it was a lot of the time, Harry out in the rainforest, walking with him, shotgun mic. He would often attack the shotgun mic. We did go through multiple cameras.
Wait, so Harry, when Harry was walking alone, he was carrying a shotgun mic, It was a
Sony Handycam, which had a shotgun mic on top of it.
Got it. Okay.
And that had the night vision, the infrared. So it was really important. It was an important camera for us. We shot a lot on that.
Yeah, the infrared came out amazing. I mean, just like for our podcast listeners out there, when we refer to Keanu is an ocelot baby that they are raising. And going back to what Trevor said a second ago, yes, kids, when you're starting a documentary, getting those release forms from your subjects, very important early on. You want to do it early in the process, not later in the process, which I guess is a question for you guys. We're going to get into this more later, but it starts off as a nature documentary, but what some of its power really has is it's a very personal look into Samantha and Harry's lives. And navigating that is tricky as a filmmaker. I could see a version of this where we focus entirely on the raising of Keanu and the raising and release of Keanu, but you don't. What could you tell us about kind of those moments when you realized, based on the footage they supplied and based on the way that things were going with their relationship and their lives in the forest, that you were going to need to ask them if they themselves wanted to personally be a part of this film beyond just the rehabilitation and release of Keanu into the wild?
If they were to have made a film themselves, and they were to have just kept filming with Keanu and made a film themselves, it probably would have been a film predominantly about them raising this cat and putting it back into the wild. And there would have been very little other than perhaps a mention that Harry was a veteran, that kind of thing. And so we obviously understood. I can't remember who it was, but someone was telling me this the other day, that this editor is working on a film, and the editor keeps saying to the main character of the film, I have to figure out how to make this film appealing to people that live in Iowa, and right. Because like we know that, there's a population of documentary lovers in Los Angeles and documentary lovers in New York, because that's where most filmmakers are located. But you don't think of documentary as being necessarily as interesting to people that, aren't on those two coasts. That's something that certainly comes to mind for us. Like, I think that there probably would be a decent audience just to watch this cat being reintroduced. But obviously the human element, is what pulls I think, even more people in to some degree, or at least it creates more entry points for people into the film, right? So it's not just a wildlife story. It's not just a story about reintroducing this cat. So Melissa and I were always aware that that was something that we wanted to do. And I think, the archive of footage that they had filmed showed us that this was something that was worth pursuing. I mean, you see some footage of Harry, obviously being very emotional that they filmed themselves. And we see footage of him filming things that are, extraordinarily difficult. And so we both knew very early on that he was somebody that was comfortable in that way, that he wouldn't shy away from sharing how he felt or acting a certain way just because a camera was around.
Right.
And, Samantha, on the other hand, was much more guarded and much more composed, in the archive as well. And it wasn't really until some way through the process, about like 8 or 9 months into the process of making this film, that Samantha opened up to us. And that was really actually shortly after her father passed away that she decided start sharing with us more deeply about her relationship with her father and what it was like growing up. And so her story, really revealed itself in the process.
And we're going to talk about that later for sure, because it really informs everything in the film, because it informs about the relationships that she got into in her own life based on her relationship with her father, which is fascinating. There's an interesting decision that was made here in which you two decided to kind of stay out of it and give a very omniscient point of view. You easily could have been narrating more. You could have shown your journey in parallel with their journey of being in the rainforest, but you didn't. And it really was so hidden that I had to start clocking, was this all archival footage from GoPro cameras? And there was a scene where the two of them were talking, and I'm like, why did they have a GoPro set up there? And then the camera kind of moves. I'm like, there is somebody holding a camera there. Finally, I've found a shot. So tell us about that decision of you two staying out of it, which again worked absolutely perfectly, but I would think it's not that easy to do in a situation like this.
Yeah, it was a hard decision. And it was something that we played around with in the edit. You're talking about them opening up to us and kind of that decision-making process. I like to say, I think it was inevitable when you're in the rainforest and you're so remote. There's no Wi-Fi, there's no cell service. You can't kind of leave the platform and close the door or go next door and
right.
kind of check out. You're there. We're together. We're all living on this 20 by 30 foot platform and in the middle of the rainforest. And so that does something to you. It does something to your presence, how present you are with the people you're with. It kind of strips you of all the things that would otherwise just create a more, guarded conversation or relationship. You're really, truly there with each other. And so the rainforest was very much a reason why we all, I think, got as close as we did and had the conversations we had. You're sitting out there for, hours on end, batting away flies and mosquitoes, and you have a camera. So let's talk, passing time and talking and laughing and crying. And they're all kind of human ways of passing time. So
yeah.
The rainforest was a huge element of that. And I think while there were, of course, a lot of shots of us, and they joke about, wait till we release the film that we're making about you, the making of, I think it was a creative decision because there was already so many different storylines and we had 3 compelling characters. We also have an act 1 that I won't spoil, but it sets everything up. It was a complicated edit and it was a complicated arc.
Great choice, because it allowed you to focus the film and to paint in very broad strokes by just focusing on them. But I'm of the party that feels that it's okay for a documentarian to add narration or to occasionally show what they're going through.
I think it was also because they were filming so much of it themselves.
Yeah.
And so we wanted it to feel really cohesive, that, like you said, you don't actually know when we're there or not. And a lot of times, we would just set up a camera on a tripod and let it roll for 6 hours or 8 hours, because you never knew what was going to happen. And when you're in that environment, something can just happen in an instant. Harpy eagle will come down and boom, grab a pacarana right in front of you or something, crazy. So you really want to be rolling all the time. And then, of course, the cat dynamic with the human dynamic. There was a lot of, even if we were there, sometimes we weren't actually physically touching the camera. We had cameras mounted around the platform. And
that's the last thing that's going to launch into the spoilers, because there's so much to discuss about the spoilers in the movie, because it's so fantastic. You two have amazing experience going through as long as you did of a shoot in the rainforest. How many cameras did you have? What were some of the tips and tricks that you wish you knew by the end that you had to learn difficultly? Because obviously you're battling the elements and sensitive modern technology does not always fare well with them. So I know from some of the drone shots that there were solar panels on the cabin. So at least you were able to recharge your batteries. You were able to back up things to hard drives. How much storage did you bring with you? What kind of drive cloning did you do in case a drive was going to die? How many cameras did you have? I want to hear those silly, geeky details really quick if I can.
Yeah, we had probably, I think, 6 or 7 different types of cameras. Melissa had a C300 Mark II. I had a C100 Mark II. We had the Sony Handycam. We had a Canon 5D. We had GoPros. We had multiple types of phones. I think when we started, we both had older iPhones, and when we finished, we had newer iPhones. Harry had a Samsung, I think a Note 10 or something like that he filmed on that we brought down for him. And then before that, he was filming on his older phone, which some of that footage is included. So there were a lot of cameras during production. I'm sure there were probably a few other cameras. I think we even used some cell phone footage from other people. So who knows what cameras they were using. And then, in terms of the equipment, the humidity and stuff is definitely pretty hard on the equipment down there. But we already had spent a lot of time filming in humid places, like in the north of Australia, where we've been the Crocodile Project, and then obviously all of my time filming orangutans with Tim Lehman. So I had learned the trick of making sure you have, a hard shell case, like a Pelican case with silica in it, so that, you can close it up, put the cameras in there at the end of the day and make sure that they stay.
Sorry to interrupt. I'd once heard from a DP that sometimes in a humid environment, like a rainforest in particular, using a waterproof mounting that somebody would use to film underwater is even a good idea because it keeps the humidity out. Is that true? Did you do anything like that?
We didn't do anything like that. That would be incredibly heavy. I've done a decent underwater work, and those underwater housings, even like the lighter surfing housings, for surf photography, are still pretty heavy. So it'd be pretty prohibitive to film with something like that in the forest. And, ultimately it's only as dry as the air that's kind of sealed in there.
Yeah.
So you'd have it really dry, and then you'd have to put the camera in, and the second you put the camera in, you're introducing moist air. So the best thing we could do was really to, at the end of the day, put our equipment into a dry case of some sort and let it dry with silica. And then of course you can cook silica. You don't need electricity to do that, so we could actually just cook it in pans on the gas stove that they had there. Keep all of our equipment as dry as possible. That said, certainly plenty of stuff got ruined, whether we were filming in the rain or the humidity just eventually took over. But in terms of tips and tricks, I don't really know if I have. Melissa may have some. I don't know if I have any that we learned. I don't know how different we would do it, to be honest with you, because I think one of the things that Melissa and I leaned into on this film, and it's something that we're repeating on the next film we're working on, is keeping our team incredibly small. I think that like with the success of Wildcat, we're probably in a position to bring a sound person and hire other cinematographers to work on our projects. But, it's very quick. That can very quickly kind of ruin the intimacy of this type of film. And so, moving forward, like we're not only directing our next film, but we're producing it, and we're also shooting it predominantly. And we don't have a sound person working on it. So, we're kind of repeating the same thing. We found that it worked so well. And I think there's a tendency in the film world, like once you get some success, to build out a team. And I don't know, people seem to pull it off, right? But I just find that it's a very tricky line to walk, and that it can destroy the intimacy very quickly.
Well, tell me this. What about your data storage? How many drives did you have with you? How many cards did you have with you?
We used Lacy Ruggeds, and those were really good in the field. They held up pretty well. I think at first we started with like Thunderbolt 3 and then moved to USB-C. But yeah, those were really good. We'd come down with basically like 4 terabytes each drive, and then we would back those up. Also, Harry was filming while we were gone. He would be filming a lot. Right. We ended up with about 60 terabytes of footage, over 1,000 hours.
Wow.
So we would come down, we would bring drives and download what he had been filming over the last, month or so. And then we would also need drives for what we were, going to then be shooting for the next few weeks that we were going to be there. So yeah, big cards. I think the trick too was batteries, bigger batteries that would last, we would charge up a bunch of batteries and come in with all of that ready to go. Also computers charged up, because we never knew what the electricity situation was going to be, if there was clouds or it rained for 2 days, you're screwed. So it was a balance of shooting enough and making sure you're really, really rolling to capture those things that you would never expect. And then also, kind of being conservative enough to have it last as long as possible. We didn't shoot in 4K. It was all 1080.
Okay.
We just wanted everything to last as long as possible.
It looked great. It looked great. I mean, I guess on that note, I would ask, were you getting everything logged as it was coming in with your editorial team when you have a high amount of footage like that? Because, as it said, and we'll talk about it in the spoiler section, which we're almost to, documentaries are made in the editing room because there's so many choices. There's so much footage. Yeah. So just going through a tower of footage like that in itself is a Herculean task. And I'm curious if you, while you were away and then when you're back, you had an editorial team logging it, transcribing, helping you guys assess where you were.
We had an incredible, we call her our secret weapon. Her name's Mallory Bracken. She's our co-producer and associate editor. And we brought her on quite early. So we started production in fall of 2018. And she came on initially to just, or not to just, it's a very intensive process to transcribe our interviews. So it started with that. And she actually quit her full-time job and took a leap with us on this film. She's also in Richmond, Virginia. And she started creating this log because none of us had done this before. We didn't really know what was normal. And this log ended up taking 4 years. She watched every single second of footage and logged it in detail, in meticulous detail in terms of who's in the shot, what they're wearing, what time of day it was, how wide or tight the shot is, where the location of the shot, if there was any dialogue, she transcribed that into the log. I mean, it was basically, you could read through our log, and this is what ended up happening when we brought on more editors. They would read through the log. It took them maybe 2 weeks to read through the log, and it was like being there every second of production.
What logging software did she use?
It was an Excel spreadsheet. It was a Google Drive.
Really? Okay. That works. I mean, of course it works. That works. But yeah, that's amazing to have a log like that, because then everything's searchable and you're able to find exactly where the footage is based on the time code. So that makes
the best. Yeah. And it was, okay, we need a shot specifically of them cooking, and boom, here's 28 hours of cooking.
I had read that you guys went down there 13 times total. Is that correct? And how long did you spend each of those trips?
Yeah, we did 13 trips each. And I think collectively spent just under 200 days, each in the rainforest. So the trips would vary. I mean, sometimes it was a shorter trip, like 8 days, and then other times it was 3 weeks. It would really vary depending on what we were going down there for. A lot of our trips were organized around sort of specific moments that we knew there was something going to be happening, like Keanu's eventual release and Harry leaving, obviously, or Samantha was going to be going down there. And so we knew that was going to be important because she wasn't always there because she was trying to fundraise and work on her PhD and University of Washington. So whenever we had like moments like that, that was sort of what sparked our travel to the Amazon. But yeah, collectively, just under 200 days each that we spent filming there.
That's great. Well, so, all right, you tell us, what do you want to call the budget and schedule for the film?
It was just under $2 million. So
okay.
That's what it ended up being, but it started much, much lower than that. And, as we kind of continued production and then ended up bringing on our first financing partner, 30 West, in fall of 2020, we were able to kind of, get a bigger team and really start getting some material in the edit. And then, of course, when we pre-sold it to Amazon, fall of 2021, a year after that, we were able to also, then have the full vision of what we wanted this movie to be with the sound design and the color and all.
And when you pre-sold it to Amazon, was it based on kind of like a brief cut or a sizzle reel style of a few sequences to get them interested into what it was? Was that how that pitch worked?
It was a trailer and then a collection of scenes and then a pitch deck with all the photographs, because, Trevor was taking photographs throughout production and they were all, we were doing screen grabs and things. So we didn't know what the ending was, but we did know there was a story there.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our non-spoiler section. There is no way to keep talking about this film without getting into the spoilers. And I want to dive right into it from the start. Your first act. Harry is very vulnerable as a person due to his PTSD and his service in Afghanistan in the British Army. And he really does take solace in the rainforest and bonds with the ocelot that he's rehabilitating, known as Khan. And, you're showing the dangers of the jungle. You're reminding the viewer it's the jungle, but Khan's a cute little ocelot, and Harry and Khan have really bonded. And then you really pull the carpet out from your your viewers' feet. I mean, as life's course chose the way to do it, in which a illegal hunting trap of just a shotgun on a string, which was left by poachers, essentially kills Khan. And at that point, Harry is completely devastated. He feels that all the good work on his mental health that he's done has been unraveled. And he's at a very vulnerable point in his life again. And as you said, that's where you met him. It's right before Samantha had brought Keanu, the next baby ocelot that they were going to rehabilitate in. I'm just kind of curious about having a first act like that and knowing how much time to spend with Khan, because I think everything that you do in your first act really benefits the rest of the film, because we're reminded, yeah, this is the Amazon. And there are poachers, and there's a lot of natural threats and human threats to the animals that they're trying to rehabilitate. So tell us about kind of that first act where you have so much going on, but you're so focused that it really, I don't know, I was on edge for the rest of the movie as to what was going to happen to Keanu.
I'll say this and then I'll let Melissa answer it in more detail, because she's an editor on the film as well, obviously, and, you know, spent a lot more time in the trenches, if you will, than I did. But something that Melissa and I both felt very strongly about, there was an early rough cut that we actually had the whole story about Khan as a flashback. And Melissa and I, as directors, both felt that it didn't work because it didn't raise the stakes enough for Keanu and Harry's time with Keanu. Because we both knew how tenuous of a situation it was. As Keanu wasn't successful, that might spell some really terrible things for Harry's future. So we always, you know, knew that was important, and we really didn't like the way that it worked with this flashback. There are obviously a lot of people that had different views and thought that the flashback could work, but that was sort of, I think, one of our probably strongest directorial stances was making sure that we didn't construct it that way. And so we started playing around with how to do it in the first act, and it was definitely one of our biggest challenges, if not our biggest challenge, was figuring out how to make that work.
That's an incredible piece of advice, though, to kill a flashback and to really just let it unfold.
It seemed almost too obvious, right?
Yeah.
Like telling this story in a linear fashion. And I think that's why the early rough cuts, a story like this, or I think any good film, you continue to reveal, and you continue to complicate and intertwine, and everything gets, you know, gnarled up together until you reach that climax point where it's like, you know, where do we go from here? And so I think the impulse was like, let's complicate it and let's have this reveal happen. And then everything kind of clicks and you realize the stakes of Keanu and the importance as things are starting to unravel. But what it did was it created a very lopsided movie. And with the intensity of the Khan story at that end, as also Keanu was, you know, coming back, and as Harry thought he was failing, and as we see the mental health breakdown, and then also, spoiler, as the relationship is dissolving, it was too much. It was back to back to back in terms of the kind of intensity of that swing. And the beginning was very cute and cuddly and this beautiful love story, and the cat, you know, the baby ocelot, and it's all really adorable and light. And so it created this really unbalanced movie where it was, you know, you're at the second half of, you're like, I'm in a different movie. So swinging that Khan story, that flashback up to act one was, one of the most critical things we did in the edit. It also, within the first 20 minutes, you realize that this isn't a story of just wildlife, you know, reintroduction, that this camera and these characters are not shying away from the harder moments. There is deep themes of self-harm or suicide, of, you know, life hanging in the balance. And we see that with Khan. And then it also sets up this dynamic of Samantha's concern for Harry and that love, and how she's also trying to kind of, I will say, help or save him while he's also trying to help and save the cats.
Thematically, that's what worked so well about the film. Sorry to interrupt, was that the fact that, you know, on its surface, you could say it's about rehabilitating an animal to go back into the vicious jungle and survive, right? To give this baby ocelot a chance. But at the same time, the movie is actually about Harry and Samantha leaning on each other and trying to give each other what they need to go back out into the world after this is over, because they do not live 24/7 in the Amazon. So you really had a kind of mirror image of this concept of healing going on. But, you know, you were also very forthcoming about, for a long time, the concept of nature is healing, right? So it's a truism, you know, it is good for people with PTSD to sometimes get out into nature, to interact with animals. There is a healing aspect. But what you showed so fantastically about mental health in this movie is that it's not a magic pill. It does not solve all of your problems and make them go away. You have to, just like Keanu does, adapt to your environment on your own when you're ready to. And that's what I think is the real kind of magic of this movie. And now we could finally get to it. As you said, in the movie, it wasn't clear that Samantha's father had passed away. But she does have a line where she says, the last thing he said to me was, thanks for not giving up on me. So it was clear he passed away, but it wasn't clear of what. And it's very telling that after we've seen Harry's episodes of PTSD, some of his rage, some of his depression where he can't get out of bed for 2 hours at a time, to see Samantha open up about her father as an alcoholic and her growing up in an environment that she didn't always trust people. And to see that behavior replicated on a different level in Harry was, again, triggering for her, of course. So tell us about that point in your filming, in your discussions with them, in which she agreed to be vulnerable as a subject in the movie as well, rather than, again, doing the happy couple releases Ocelot into the Wild movie that this could have been, and I'm so glad wasn't.
Yeah, I think it, I mean, at least as I remember it, the moment that Samantha really opened up to us was, as I said earlier, was just after her dad died. And I'll never forget the first time that she sort of talked to us about it at length. And it was, it wasn't even what I would call an interview. It was just, she was sitting at this sort of wooden table, picnic table almost type thing that they have on this platform where we live. And she had her head down on her two hands, kind of like this. And she just started talking, and we had a 5D that was just sitting on the table rolling with no, lighting, no additional audio, nothing. And she talked for about an hour and a half. And that was the first time where we had actually recorded her talking at length about her experiences with her father. We both knew kind of a little bit at that point that she had these experiences, but she hadn't talked about them at length, and she certainly hadn't talked about them on camera. And then from that point forward, she really started to open up more and more, not only about, her father and her relationship with her father, but also about the interaction with Harry. And, what we see through this process is that she begins recognizing that she's making some mistakes, and she's sort of replicating, as she says in the end, replicating what she had in her childhood with her adult life. And, we actually had one of our executive producers told us to, go on the internet and look up adult children of alcoholics. And if you go on and you Google that, and, you'll find a website like the, Psychiatric Association of America or whatever, they'll list all of the sort of traits of someone that has this syndrome. And they mirrored Samantha perfectly. One of the first things that it said was an intense desire to save other people or save other things. And, every time we went with Sam anywhere, she was constantly saving every animal that she found, right? Like, so you're walking down the street and there's a stray dog, and, it takes you 4 hours to walk like a couple hundred meters, because the entire time she's literally going up to every dog, giving it food, putting collars. She would buy all these collars and put the collars on all the street dogs, because if they had collars, it seemed like they belonged to somebody. So there was less chance of them being hurt or killed by somebody. They were given a little more respect. As we saw things like that, we realized that this was something that we really wanted to follow, and make sure that we tease this out in the film to help, balance the film. And I think that that's one of the, the other important things is that we have two people who arrived at a similar place, but taking completely different paths, right? And I think that that's one of the things that people don't often think about. Certainly for me, through the process of making this film, as a result of making it, I now am much more likely to ask the question, like, what is that person going through, than I would have before making this film. But I think that we live in a society and a culture where obviously we are very myopic. And so it was just something we became increasingly aware of, was paying attention to, this contrast between the two of them. I hate to say this, but it was very, interesting to explore. For lack of a better word, it was just interesting to see how both these people found each other and ended up in this place doing this work as a result of the things that they had gone through. Yeah. But like I said, completely different paths, right? Harry has extraordinary family, extraordinary childhood. Everything was really quite happy. Samantha, of course, that wasn't the case, but they both ended up in the same position, really.
I think it's important too to mention that as our relationships deepened and as we all formed a stronger relationship and a friendship and became this little family living in the rainforest, Trevor and myself also opened up about our lived experiences and our past. I say this and it's true, and you can't ask someone to be vulnerable if you're not willing to be vulnerable yourself. And part of the process of making this movie was having conversations and being true with some of the things that we struggle with or that we've experienced, and putting that on the table and, having that be a part of the conversation as well. You mentioned, we're not on screen, and that's true, but our story is very much a part of that story. And, what you see on screen is a result of where we were able to go emotionally and, the vulnerability that also we brought to the conversations. So Trevor struggled with depression and anxiety for about a decade now. And the way that he was able to relate with Harry and some of the things that they were able to talk about, especially in those lower moments, it was unique to them. And I think it created a trust and a bond that you feel and you see on screen in some of the things that Harry talks about. And similarly with myself and Samantha, I started opening up about some of the things that I had been through as a child for the first time in my life, and having conversations, with her about that. And so we kind of went on this journey together to just open up about it and talk about it. And, I started therapy with my dad for the first time in my life because of making this movie. So it starts to peel off the layers of all of us. And that's part of why you see the depth that you see, is because we all were willing and curious and were able to go there with each other.
I was also really impressed that you didn't shy away from, the fact that Harry had previously had a suicide attempt and was having ideations about suicide again during this movie when things were going bad, obviously after Khan had been killed, but also at different times with Keanu. I would just pause for a moment to say to our listeners, in case you don't know this year, the United States has set up a hotline that is 988, kind of like the new 911 for emergencies. If you dial on any phone in the United States, 988, there is a 24/7 suicide hotline. And I recently had a childhood friend who had lost touch with, but had committed suicide 2 weeks ago. And everybody knew that they had mental health problems and were going through it. But at the end of the day, they succumbed. So it's important to be able to take something like suicide and put it, sometimes where people don't expect it, which is in a film like this, because it's a real part of their life and their journey, and it helps bring about awareness. So I'm curious for you as filmmakers, as documentarians, when Harry is having suicidal ideations, was there a time that you just really kind of needed to put down the camera and go to his aid so that he didn't hurt himself? Because we see him cut himself off camera behind some sheets, but we know that it's happening. But I'm just curious if there was ever a more dire threat that maybe we didn't see because, you as filmmakers, I'm sure when you're so close to your subjects, didn't want to just stand by.
There were definitely more moments than I can count where, we didn't film. I mean, a lot of what you see when Harry, is really having a difficult time with Keanu is after, Keanu's release, he starts coming back to the platform. And obviously Harry then believed that he had failed, and no amount of kind of outside information was going to convince him otherwise, it seemed. And so because he felt that he failed, and that's a huge sort of theme in his life, he tied that to the military, right? Where he felt like he went over to go and do something that he thought was good, was contributing to making the world a better place. And then very quickly realized that, we didn't belong in Afghanistan. We didn't belong, there in any way. And who was he? What right did he have to be there doing the things that he was doing? And so he felt that entire thing was a failure. And then, similarly with Keanu, he now feels like he's failing again. And so he's asking himself, what have I ever succeeded at in life? Nothing, right? And obviously, from my perspective and others, like just the fact that Keanu had gotten to that point was a success. But when you're in the depths of a struggle like he was, you don't necessarily see the world the same way. And I know that personally, when I'm having a really bad moment with my own depression, it's not really helpful to hear from other people, here's my advice and here's what you should do. And, if you exercise a lot, it's really, it's really great for depression. And it's like, everyone, I mean, I can't tell you for how many years, how many people sent me articles about how exercise cures depression.
Right.
And it was just not helpful, right? They don't understand. And so that was something that, fortunately I understood. And so I knew the right ways to behave because I struggled, and also I had been, getting psychiatric help and psychological help for many years. And so I had the sort of the wisdom of doctors and psychologists that I had been working with to help me through this process. And, I relied a lot on their counsel to make sure that, I was doing the right things. And so I did film some difficult moments or did document some difficult moments, but there were, more moments than I can count where the camera was put down, where I was talking to Harry and just letting him know, hey, I'm concerned. I care about you. I love you very much. And I see a future for you. And that's something that I think is really important to talk about, is like that somebody has a future that they're looking forward to.
Yeah.
And so that was, my main focus was like trying to help him see that future that laid in front of him. Anyway, the reason that Melissa, in case you were wondering, wasn't there as a lot of this stuff really unraveled was that she actually had brain surgery. So all of this was going on at the same time, and she was back home recovering. So I was down there kind of, holding down the fort for the last few months that Harry was really in his worst moments. But without a doubt, there were some moments where I was super concerned, and I did film a few of them. And as Melissa said earlier, we ultimately decided not to include those moments in the film. They weren't so much moments where you see him doing anything as much as me talking to him. But again, it just didn't feel right to put ourselves physically in the film.
Editorially, and I want to talk about the edit. One of the things that you did that was really interesting was part of rehabilitating an animal into the wild is you have to break the bond, right? That's why, as you were explaining earlier, there couldn't be a lot of humans around Keanu because Harry was really supposed to be the only one, so that Keanu would know that humans could be a threat, and that at a certain point, Harry has to break the bond as well. As the breaking the bond is happening, editorially, their relationship is also falling apart. Now, I don't know if it really happened like that. And if it did, so be it. But otherwise, it was a brilliant choice to have those two narratives suddenly run concurrently. Ooh, hey, I'm just jumping in really quick to remind you to check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We just turned 10 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. So thanks so much for supporting independent film journalism. But, since it's the holiday season, of course, you could also give the gift of Backstory to the storyteller in your life. Just use the gift box at checkout at backstory.net. And, look, if you've never read us before, you could test drive us. You could read the free issue of Backstory on a desktop or laptop or via our iPad app, which coincidentally is called Backstory. Now is the perfect time to subscribe because we just published our Wakanda Forever issue, which has a lot of award season stuff in it as well. You could see the full table of contents over at backstory.net. So there is a lot to explore. And, if you want to subscribe to sweeten the deal, I am offering discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5. It works over at backstory.net. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, which is where all these Zoomcasts go. It would really mean a lot to me to have you support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. But now let's get right back into our conversation with co-director Trevor Frost and co-director Melissa Lesh about their latest documentary, Wildcat, which is in theaters right now and coming onto Amazon Prime Video on December 30th, 2022. Tell us about your edit. Tell us about some of the tough choices you made. And it's always amazing to hear the left turns. Mm-hmm. Where your movie for a month, a week, a couple days, a couple hours could have been this whole other subplot that is so far removed the audience would be surprised to even hear.
Yeah, I think we were as kind of shocked as probably people watching this movie that it unfolded the way that it's depicted. There are so many times where we were filming and just could not believe it felt like a scripted film. This is happening and you're anticipating these things, but you don't actually know how it's going to happen. And, it's very much the born free moment or the free willy, just go. And when you're filming that, it's hard to believe that this is real life. So the narrative actually was very true to what you see on screen.
Okay.
During that process of Keanu coming back, that was, like Trevor mentioned, it felt like he was failing. And around that time was also when because he felt he was failing, and because Keanu was so important, his well-being was very much tied to Keanu's well-being. And when he started coming back to the platform, it wasn't just that his bond, was so strong, and he felt like he actually failed in making him wild, but also that, him coming onto human platforms, or this, he would come because of the scent, and he would get into food, and he would, eat plastic bags and rummage around and just cause total mayhem. And part of what was so scary to them was if he did that somewhere else and he went to another logging camp or just off their land and went up to people, he'd be dead instantly, And so it was this fear of him coming back because it was not an indication that he was going to be successful. So during that time, when it felt like Keanu was failing, that was also when Harry's mental health was really taking a toll. And because of that, that was kind of compounding the situation of their relationship. And Samantha, as you see, kind of had some light bulb moments. And I think we all did. We were all trying to figure out how do you navigate this? How do you be there for this person? But also, how do you draw your own boundaries? And how do you make sure that we're taking care of ourselves too? And so you see that flip in Sam when she goes and calls a suicide hotline, because I think it was up until that point, she was willing to do anything. And it became clear that actually she might be enabling. And so because of that created a different perspective also on their relationship, what she was undergoing, the kind of secondary trauma also that she was experiencing by being there and being a part of, facilitating or, sometimes encouraging that behavior. So it really started to crack open their dynamic. And I think, it's important to mention that what we see on camera, what we see in this film, it's very much an origin story. It is them, like we mentioned, learning in the process of doing and learning something that had never been done in this way. So Sam says often, sometimes the mistakes you make are the most important learning lessons. And they learned a lot from Khan and also Keanu. And with Keanu, it was clear that level of connection and that bond isn't the most successful way to reintroduce a cat. And Harry at the time, needed that. And Keanu, it seemed that was the way that it was that they wanted to do it. But since then, it's been revised dramatically, and the cats have much, much less contact with the rehabber. They have bigger enclosures. They have more of like a wild simulation. So there's actually other prey species that can come underneath the enclosure that will enter. So they get this sense of hunting, even though they're still protected from bigger other, wild animals.
Yeah.
They do have contact when they're babies because you have to, the bottle feeding,
right.
parasite medication. But then once they reach a certain point, it's almost completely hands off. And it's hard because, these wild animals, they actually do want that bond. And with Keanu or some of the other cats now that Sam's working with, she talks about walking away from the enclosure and they'll be there crying, crying for her to come back to play with them or to have stimulation. And she has to, it's brutal, but she knows that in the end, for their well-being, she has to not get that close.
Out of 1,000 hours, what was a subplot that you had in the film for a while in your cut that you just had to cut, that you miss? Something interesting that you miss, be it a scene or an entire subplot?
I worked for a very long time on this whole section of scenes about collaring Keanu. So they actually fundraised for a telemetry collar that was going to allow them to track him in that area, so that when he was released, they would know if he was alive, what his heart rate was doing. They could really see his whereabouts and make sure he was still alive. And it was important because Keanu's success was tied to this telemetry collar. And it was also a pretty new, scientific undertaking to be able to attach this collar to a small cat in the rainforest. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Keanu hated the collar. He put his paws underneath and almost, strangled himself. He was really, really mad. It was a turning point because at that point, it was kind of like they had to let go. He was going to be wild. They would rather him be a wild cat than for this technology to jeopardize his well-being in his life. So it was something that we worked really hard for. But she actually, now the technology has changed and they actually are able to attach much smaller collars with smaller batteries. They don't last as long, but they are something that they can monitor the cats now.
Something that worked great in the cut that Trevor kind of touched on earlier was for people that have suicidal ideations to give them hope for a future. And something that was a great contrast, and I don't know if it was an idea of you guys as the filmmakers or just it was scheduled to happen, was having Harry's family visit and remind Harry when he was so far away from the world, the people that were most important to him, the people that he wanted to live for, as he says, multiple times, his little brother. Tell us about that, because it dropped really well into the edit. It didn't take away from anything, but it kind of showed how in the world after working in the Peruvian Amazon, Harry could get his own coping skills and have a better world to interact with, hopefully for him.
Yeah. So when we started filming, with Keanu and Harry and Samantha, that was October of 2018. And it was sometime in spring 2019 that we learned from Harry and Samantha that his parents and brother were going to come down and visit. So that, it had nothing to do with us by any means, but we knew that it was going to be a really important moment to film because Harry hadn't seen them in a long time. At that stage, I think it was about a year and a half that he hadn't seen them. And this was the first time that they were ever visiting the Amazon. And Harry had been working down there for, I think at that point, close to 4.5 years, 5 years. So, they obviously knew that this place was incredibly important to him and they had been wanting to take a trip somewhere. And so they decided to make their trip to Peru, and they went a few other places in Peru, but they spent a week, obviously with him and Samantha and on the same platform, and got to go on all sorts of adventures. And we, that was one of the scenes after Melissa and I filmed that, we both knew immediately that like, this is going to be in the film. And so really it was, just a question of how do we integrate it in a way that it doesn't feel like it's, somebody watched one of our rough cuts and they said that, they felt that it was narratively lost when we had it in there. And so, Melissa and all of our other editors worked to make sure that it felt like it was more a part of the overall story. And so there were a few little changes and tweaks that happened that made it seem, to be more smooth. In fact, that filmmaker then watched the final cut and said that he felt that it like totally belonged there. So it's amazing what small changes can do.
Melissa, what do you think the secret was?
It was combining. So this was actually another structural move. The suicide attempt that actually came a lot earlier in the edit. And what we did was, and this was based on a very, very smart note from another filmmaker that we got based on our rough cut, we brought that early kind of flashback of the suicide attempt and brought it right up before, as you see now, with the family. So doing that, connecting the dots between how important his little brother was, even in that darkest moment when he was attempting to take his life, and waking up from that and realizing that he had made a big mistake because he didn't want his little brother to find him.
Yeah.
His little brother, Jaden was that light for him, even in those darkest moments. And so putting those things together and feeling how important that relationship is. And then, of course, when you see them together in the jungle and you see, Jaden ask that really sweet and naive question of what are those cuts on your arm?
Yeah.
And Harry finally opens up to him about it. There's some real vulnerability there and love. And, Harry talks about if Jaden was struggling, people say, what gave you the courage, to tell him this younger brother who you love so much, what you had done with the self-harm. And he said, I was trying to dodge around the bush. And then I finally realized that, if my little brother was struggling, I would want him to tell me. And I would want him to be able to open up to me about it. So in that moment, I felt like I really should be honest with him. And he got it, and you could see the look in Jaden's eyes that he realized, okay, and he's young, but, my brother is self-harming, and this is what it means. So I think connecting all those dots, another big theme in the film that you realize as you're stringing this together and trying to sift through all these scenes and the material, is letting go and the kind of bold, what it takes to love and know that you're going to have to let go. And there's something to be said for that. And you see it for, his parents, you see them not knowing if they're going to see their son again. And then at the end, when his dad, hugs him, Harry surprises his family after he gets back from the airport. And the emotion in that hug, you realize that he didn't know if he was ever going to see his son again.
Yeah.
And then when he leaves again, he leaves to Ecuador. We finished the film and he's kind of on his new path and he's starting a new journey with conservation, and they hug at the airport again. And it's that really kind of bold foundation of knowing that you can love deeply, but also will eventually have to let go. Nothing lasts forever. So that was an important theme for both Harry, Keanu, Sam, letting go of Harry. And oftentimes letting go is the most important form of love, because it's loving yourself and it's loving that person. It's recognizing when to let go.
And it ties back to what the movie's about, because they're letting go of Keanu at a certain point towards the end, in which they have to distance from him and, yell at him to stay away from the camp and change their personality so that they fear him. I mean, it really matches up perfectly. Just briefly, because I know we're running out of time, how long was your editorial process, would you say?
We went full on in the edit for about a year.
Okay.
Once we had real steam in our tank, or
with
gas in our tank.
3 editors, if I'm not mistaken.
We ended up with 4 editors, but
okay.
predominantly, yeah. So Joshua Altman and I were editing for the bulk of that. And then we had the pleasure of working with David Zeef. He came on a little bit closer to the end, and then Ben Gold came on almost right at the end.
Okay.
But I had been editing since 2018, really, since we started filming sizzles and teasers and just scenes to, get some grants here and there.
Geeky question, what were you editing on?
It was done on Premiere. We had this kind of new form of Premiere Productions, and it was allowing us to work remotely. So I think it was something they developed actually during the pandemic, and we were one of the first projects to really take hold and try it out, and it worked for the most part pretty well.
Okay, well, so wrapping up, I want to know, what was your toughest scene for each of you? It could be different. What was your toughest scene to film, and how did you creatively get through it? And then what's next? So that's my double last question to each of you. No pressure on Trevor. We're starting with you. What was your toughest scene?
Toughest scene for sure was, as Harry was sort of really, when he was in his darkest moments and just trying to figure out, when do I put the camera down? When do I film? What exactly do I need to do here just as a human? And then, tied into that was when he finally does leave and he says goodbye to Khan. He goes and kisses Khan's grave and talks to Khan for a while, at the grave. And that was a pretty, it was both touching and also really heart wrenching. But that really entire kind of like final month and a half, was just very difficult for me, especially because I was there by myself. I didn't have Melissa or anyone other than Samantha to talk to. And then obviously Samantha and Harry were, unraveling. And so I was kind of also caught in the crossfire between the two of them, which made it extra difficult. And then our next project is in India. And it's very similar in that it's following a story that has to do with animals, but also our relationship to them. But also, in some ways, it doesn't have anything to do with that as well. So it's kind of weaving in scenes, but this time, rather than mental health issues, it's dealing more with family dynamics, especially a father-son relationship. And the animal this time it's snakes. So not one animal, but snakes.
Does it have a title?
The Snake Rescuer's Son is what it's tentatively called.
Okay. Melissa, what was your toughest scene and how'd you get through it?
I think some of the hardest scenes for me to film were with Sam back in Bainbridge Island. We went to her childhood home, and this was after her father had passed, and she was reflecting on, a lot of the things that she had been through as a kid, and was actually cleaning up the house that he was living in and that they were going to move back into. Her mom had just moved back into. And I think being in that space and hearing some of the stories and the memories of what took place in that house, and knowing that they were now going to be there most of the time, kind of surrounded by that, but also that, it's bittersweet. There's also a missing and a mourning, and feeling like maybe they didn't have enough time with him. And, when Sam in that scene, she says, it was the last thing he said to me. Thank you for not giving up on me. It just makes you think about the last moments that you have with the people you love, and how are you showing up for them? And are there things that, maybe you wish you had said, or things you had talked about? So, yeah, I think one of the things that I take away from this film, and I hope others do too, is that it can be a catalyst for deep conversations. And oftentimes there are things that we don't talk about, or we haven't fully recognized in ourselves or the people around us. And, I hope this can kind of crack us all open, because we don't have unlimited time on this planet with each other.
Yeah, that's true. And that's a great place to stop. And again, even just you talking about her house, like the fact that Samantha gave you that footage from her childhood, showing her dad kind of on edge, kind of normal in one moment, and then a bit on edge, showing a little bit of the tension in the air. That was also very vulnerable for her as well, and was, a great addition. But look, I love Wildcat. I think you both made a fantastic film. I cannot wait to see what you do next. You've been very generous with your time. Trevor, Melissa, thanks a lot for coming down and chatting today.
Thanks, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
And that's how the Q&A went down. Special thanks again to co-directors Trevor Frost and Melissa Lesh for being so generous with their time in talking about their latest documentary, Wildcat. It's in theaters right now and comes onto Amazon Prime Video on December 30th, 2022. Of course, while you're surfing around online, I hope you also check out Backstory Magazine over at backstory.net. We just turned 10 this year, and we couldn't have done it without you. It's the holiday season, so I hope you will consider giving the gift of Backstory to the storyteller in your life. You just tick the little gift subscription box at checkout over at backstory.net. That's the way to do it. And now is the perfect time to subscribe because we just published our Wakanda Forever issue, which has a lot of great award season coverage in it. And you could see our full table of contents over at backstory.net. If you've never read us before, you could test drive us by reading a free full issue over at backstory.net or in our iPad app, Backstory. And of course, to sweeten the deal, I want to give you a $5 off coupon, which is discount coupon code SAVE5. That's SAVE and the number 5, and that will get you $5 off a 1-year subscription. And you could just enter that code at the shopping cart at backstory.net. So look, it would really mean a lot to me to have my podcast listeners and iTunes and Spotify and my YouTube watchers of the Backstory Magazine YouTube page support my passion project. So thanks for considering becoming a subscriber. The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith podcast is a copyright of Unlikely Films Incorporated in 2022. All rights reserved. Folks, if you want to reach out to me, the easiest way to find me is on Twitter. I'm Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. You could also find me on Instagram as Yo Goldsmith or Backstory_mag. Or you could look at my Facebook fan page, which I have set up for Jeff Goldsmith. I don't check that as much. I'm trying to get better this year. And of course, you could always email us at backstoryletters@gmail.com. And it might take me a heartbeat to get back to you via email, but I do go through it and try and respond to everybody that I can. So that's the other way to reach me as well. I'm Jeff Goldsmith, the publisher of Backstory Magazine and the host of the Q&A, thanking you for tuning in and telling you to stay out of trouble. Till next week.